Okay.
So Mr. Ganesh will let us know when we are ready to start.
Yes, give me about 30 seconds, please.
Okay.
We are ready.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's policy committee. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Dr. Russell or Mrs. Widener, would one of you please
Dr.
make
Russell,
sure
you want to broadcast the meeting, Dr. Russell?
Do I hit live here?
I'm sorry, what?
Dr. Russell needs to broadcast the meeting. I'm going to hit it. Right.
Okay, I don't have a, okay.
We are live.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I can take attendance.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. So welcome to the meeting this evening. And it's my understanding that Mr. Ganesh is also streaming this meeting over the district's YouTube channel, really as a trial run for the effort to stream tomorrow night's meeting via YouTube as well. So we'll go through attendance. You'll taking that. Thank you very much, Dr. Russell. And we'll move on to section 1.03, comments from the audience. Does anyone have any comments before we move into the agenda? And actually, Dr. Russell, Mr. Ganesh, I see that we do have some people participating tonight as attendees. Are they able to comment or use the Q&A? Are we asking them to send emails to the email link that's posted here, or can we allow them to just comment into the meeting?
So they can use the Q&A feature.
Okay, so
Or they can email us.
so I'd like to Mrs. Widener, are you able to see if we have comments coming in through the virtual board meeting during the meeting this evening?
Yes, I can double check that.
Okay, so please keep an eye on that, and if you are able to, and then let me know if comments pop up.
Okay.
I would also offer to our attendees, if you'd like to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen there to enter comments, please feel free to do so. Our committee meetings are generally less structured than our formal board meetings, so please feel free to interact with us. We'll go ahead, we'll move into section 2, review cycle policies. There are no policies listed under review cycle policies at this time. And that brings us on to section 3, which are our policies from PSBA. And these are new policies that came out in June. There's 3 of them that are new from June, and then 1 that is recommended for review in preparation for the new school year. So let's start with 220, which is student expression.
And if it's all right with you, Mrs. Lofton, I'll call out that PSBA did not recommend any changes, as Ms. Widener has noted, but in the PNN document, the backup, they've recommended some resources. They're recognizing policy 220, which addresses students' rights to freedom of speech, and the board's right, while balancing it against the school district's responsibility to maintain a safe and orderly school environment while protecting the rights of all members of the community. So it highlights the real salient points of this policy and also suggests some resources, anticipating that this may be a time right now where school districts may be experiencing some student protests or student expressions that are different from what they've had or been experiencing in recent years, months. It's really just
Okay.
resources.
So could you pull up the policy on the screen, please?
Sure.
And I'm sorry, because I'm not, were the resources back in the agenda, or how was that?
So it's a good question. The resources are in the PNN. So I'll go to
Okay.
that. I'm going to open that up. And if you scroll down to right here, student protests, they just give you a brief summary, salient points, and then some resources that the school district or administrators may want to reference.
Okay. So it says they have revised it. Oh, over the past few years. Okay. So do we have information about this policy in the handbook?
Let me see. I have the handbook up actually. Dr. Clune or another principal, do you know that offhand? I'm looking through the table of contents.
I don't think we specifically have something outlined regarding student protests and a reference to that. We do reference student rights and their responsibilities, but I don't recall board policy 220 specifically being referenced in the handbook.
I don't see it either, Mrs. Lofton.
So I'm wondering if we might want to include so just going back to what PNN said, that we need to be sharing this with students, so that, especially at the middle and high school level, where is it? It says, where is it?
Right here, provide
yeah.
information.
School
and education.
Yeah. School entities should provide information and education to students regarding policy 220, their rights, and the designated time, place, and manner channels. That's a word. I feel like they forgot to take a word out there. The school entity has made available for student expression and to encourage student voice. So I'm just going back and looking at the policy. You know, I think, so there's a section on unprotected student expression. We should probably clearly state policy 220 prohibit, you know, something to the effect of policy 220 prohibits certain forms of expression. Let's see. So, you know, I think, yeah, with our heightened charged political climate, I mean, I've heard questions.
Can't hear you. You froze.
Lost us, Judy.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Mhm.
I know that there was a lot of symbols and meanings, and that some people are offended by, that other people believe is protected by free speech. And so, you know, I think it's really I am curious about how certain people or how we enforce the display of various symbols or prohibit the display of symbols that are going to be perceived as offensive to other individuals, and how we align this with our diversity policy of wanting to ensure that everybody feels that the environment is inclusive and safe and supportive, and also allow freedom of expression. So it's my understanding that we can prohibit expression that is disruptive.
That's correct.
Is that correct? So, okay, so number 6 here, interferes with or advocates interference with the rights of any individual or the safe and orderly operation of schools and their programs. So we are then, those offensive materials can be prohibited if a group indicates that they are offended by it. Is that how this works?
Yes, if they are viewed as, if they are viewed and observed as creating a disruption in the school setting, then a student can be asked to take something off, or, you know, the Tinker case where the armbands were worn, and the question about whether or not it created a disruption in the school. I mean, that's the test. I don't know of any good examples to provide where I'm guessing in a lot of cases our students comply if they are asked to remove something. I don't know if one of the principals could speak to that. And before you do, I just want to make sure I have the right policy up, Mrs. Lofton. You said number 6. Do I have the right policy up that you're referencing? 220?
Huh. I was looking under drafts. Are you under drafts? Which is actually very different from what you have up. That's one that I was looking at.
Yes, it is. Okay.
It's really quite different.
So is this going to second reading, Ms. Widener?
I think it was already changed and PSBA is reviewing it. We've made
Okay.
changes to it in March, and it'll go over to the active as soon as they get back to us.
Okay, because I saw the dates were like 1994 or something. So, and then
Yeah, the last revised, March 2020. So,
okay, great. Thank you. So,
Okay.
yeah, we really,
So is this the version that we reviewed in March, or has this been changed? And if it's been changed, how has it changed?
this is the version that you as a committee reviewed and moved on to first and then second reading. So this is now with PSBA for their review. So this is the one that you intended to have approved.
So I'm looking here, I mean, just again, looking through this quickly, I would support it. I would just go back to finding a way if we can extract salient points for students to include in the handbooks so that it is clear what you can and can't say, and that if something is causing a disruption, then building administrators have the ability to address that.
Okay, would you like me to do that for tomorrow evening's discussion of the handbooks during the board meeting and call those out? There's another change that was recommended by Mrs. Mares around unified sports. And we have the diversity and we have the discrimination claim and the way to file that. Or would you prefer to leave that go till the 13th or all, you know?
Well, if you want us to vote on it on the 13th, I would certainly want it to be called out tomorrow night. If we want to wait till August to approve this, then, you know, it can just be something that goes in the memo. Are you well,
I'm okay if the meeting can handle it. There's a lot going on tomorrow night.
I know.
That's really why I'm asking, because yeah.
How
about if I share the call out to the memo? Would that be okay? I'll call these proposed revisions to the handbooks out in the memo, and then the board would have the weekend to review them. Ms. Widener can update the summary chart. And then maybe you could take action on 13th.
So one thing that I've been wondering about is how our reopening plans are going to impact things that we're including in the handbook. And I know we've talked about this a little bit. But, you know, there's all kinds of things that are in the handbook that could potentially be subject to change, such as, you know, just the start times. I was actually wondering, you know, if we wind up doing a hybrid approach where, you know, 50% of the students are in school each day, you know, how are we, you know, I almost feel like we should wait until August and ensure that all of the information for what our approach is captured in the handbook. So, you know, like, are we going to stagger school start times? Are we going to, how attendance is being done? I remember reading yesterday that there's, we need to have policies for maintaining attendance and accounting for hours of instruction or instruction that's delivered virtually. So it's going to be very different. So I'd almost rather, you know, continue to say that the current handbook is in effect and get the handbook for this year right, rather than approve something that we know we're not going to be following. I don't know. I have mixed feelings. Do you have a recommendation around that, Barb? Because I know you're much closer to some of these conversations than I am.
I think there's logic to what you're suggesting. I was thinking that if we needed to make changes to handbook language, it could be in the form of an addendum that, because I view it as temporary, at least some aspects of how we're thinking we may be back in school or responsibilities. So we could prepare, and the PNN actually included a piece on maintaining professional adult student boundaries, considerations for a digital learning environment. It was very helpful. It's a guide. Some of that could be incorporated into an addendum that we would then present to you as a way to guide how we hold all accountable during a virtual school or a hybrid school setting. And the language that you're referencing that came out of PDE yesterday is something that will require board approval. So that'll come to you as something more formal.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's not a policy that we have to approve. It's just, what do we have to approve?
You actually, you have to enact a temporary provision, and it then has to be submitted to the Secretary of Education for approval. It has to appear in board meeting minutes, and the temporary provision must include the school's proposed calendar and academic schedule. So the state is making an exception to 180 days in school on-site seat time, which is typically how they measure it, or 990 hours in the traditional manner in the event schools move to a hybrid or a virtual approach. So this allows us to actually be accountable for that 180 days. So we'll have to keep track of that. 900 hours for elementary students, 990 for secondary, and then it has to be reported. That's typically done through our PIM system when we're in the traditional setting, and then we receive subsidies in response. So this temporary provision allows for that temporary shift in the way that we are educating kids and how we're holding them accountable time-wise, and we won't lose subsidy as a result.
Okay.
So I'll explain that more.
Okay.
That just came out yesterday.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's move forward with this for, I actually have a couple other questions that are handbook related, but I can email those, or they're pertinent to reopening and how we address things in the reopening, but we can address those when we move forward. Okay. So is everyone comfortable with that approach for incorporating some segments of this policy into the handbook?
I think it's a good idea. I'm not sure if others are responding.
Okay. Okay.
It worked for me.
Okay. Good. All right. Why don't we move on to what's the next item on our agenda is 805.2. This is also one that we recently reviewed. PSBA is recommending that we take another look at it based on current events. So if you could pull up 805.2, please.
Mrs. Lofton, we did skip over 146, so we'll just
Oh,
come back.
did we? I am so sorry. Okay, 140. Yes, that is important. 146.1. Can we please go to 146.1?
That is that's a PNN. Ms. Widener, is that in the drafts yet?
I see it.
Yes, they're all in the draft.
Thank you. Okay, so I did highlight a few things through here, if it would be helpful.
Do you want to lead us through this, Dr. Russell? Or it looks like we really have to make several choices going through here. Right? I see a lot of check boxes.
Yeah, thank you, Hank.
No problem.
Take care, you too. And honestly, I've checked all of them.
Okay.
In my view, each one of them makes sense and are at least connected in some way to the work that we're doing right now, and will strengthen the work that we're doing if we're held accountable this way. So unless somebody is opposed, I would say check all of them.
So Dr. Russell, is your recommendation to move forward with the policies exactly as presented by PSBA, or have your administration recommended any changes to it?
I am recommending exactly as it's presented with some specific checks through the different sections.
Okay.
So for example, in the delegation of responsibility, I would recommend Director of Special Ed here as the individual who's responsible for the oversight of the trauma-informed approaches, professional development, etc. I would check both of these.
Okay.
If we go on to guidelines, I would suggest checking number 3. We're obligated to do that anyway under the act. And I do have a question about number 4, and I'm not sure if Mr. Weaver's on, but we've gone back and forth about the obligation to professionally develop our school security personnel. I'm very much in favor of our contracted school security personnel being trained in trauma-informed approaches and recognizing when students may have experienced trauma. I'm not sure where we've landed though with the individual who actually we contract with. So I didn't check that one because there would be a financial obligation. So I'm not sure where that is. And Mr. Weaver, I don't know if you're on, but maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, I am on, and I will need to follow up with Mr. Miller because I know Mr. Miller was leading the charge for trauma-informed overall. I do know that there's conversations with our security agency and Mr. Miller, and I will need to follow up.
Okay, thank you.
I would think that that would be critical to ensure that our security personnel are sensitive to trauma-informed approaches when working with students. So I can't imagine that we wouldn't want to make sure that we're providing them with appropriate training.
Correct. The question pertains to money and who is paying for what. That's part of the conversation.
Okay. How much money are we talking about?
For everyone, this, as I understand it, every one of our agents must have trauma-informed training, and it is
Okay.
quite hefty at this point in time.
What's hefty?
$1,000 per person, because it's a week-long training.
So I wonder if there's another option we could look at. I don't know if that's the only one. So maybe that's some research that we can do and
Well,
get an
this is-
estimate of cost.
Yeah, this is the one of the few firms that has to be by a certified trauma-informed group, and they're the firm that we've been looking at is Cardinal Point Security. They are one of the few trauma-informed certified groups at this point in time. This is the first year since the law took into effect, so we have very limited options at this point in time.
So I'm looking at the sentence underneath training, and it says the district's trauma-informed approach plan shall include provisions for the training and development. So I think that we can say that we're going to have provisions to ensure that our security personnel receive training, and I don't think that that financially obligates us to be the ones providing the training. We can simply say that it must be a part, you know, that can get worked out later, the way I'm reading that, correct?
Yes.
Yes, I agree.
The law actually extended it for another year. So it has given contract providers and individual employees an extra year to become trauma-informed certified.
So I'm curious for other board members, would you like to see that we ensure provisions to ensure that our security personnel are trained in trauma-informed approaches? Should we check that box off? Don't everyone jump up at once.
Maybe they're having trouble unmuting.
Oh, wait. I was just talking and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm tired. Okay. I would be very interested. I think that that is something that sounds like it would be something that the security and personnel should have, because they're the ones who normally are dealing or working with students who are more at risk. So I think it 100% should be done if we can.
I agree with that. Mr. Weaver, I have a question. Is the contractor that you're talking about, the trainer that you're talking about, is that something that you found on your own, or was it recommended by the intermediate unit, or where did you find that?
The APC group has been our longtime Brian Gailey group. that has provided security services for many years for the school districts, for the school and many school districts around us. The law changed several years ago, and there's been a mad scramble for firms like theirs to get the proper training and certification in place. Unfortunately, the proper training and certification became law, and there were very few companies, and there still are very few companies that can afford the upfront cost to get those people trained and then in turn become train the trainers.
Got it.
Well, again, I'll just go back to, I think provisions is open-ended enough that we're not saying everybody will be fully trained in 3 months and we're going to pay for it. We're saying we're going to work on making this happen. So I think it's something important. I think we should include that checkbox. I'm curious, Barb, what about number 5?
So I really like number 5 too, and I would like to actually pursue this. And as another way to connect with our community, I spoke a little bit about it as part of the equity conversation last night. This connects in a nice way, in my view. So I'd really like to make an effort to have this happen and engage our community in this way. What can we offer them to feel better informed about trauma-related?
Okay.
I would recommend checking it.
Okay. Good. I'm looking under services. Do we have both MTSS and PBIS, or have we moved completely to? It's my understanding that we still have both. We still have the MTSS at a high school, right?
Right. We're working on that at the high school, and maybe Dr. Cleland can speak to this, but most other schools actually have a piece of have both frameworks implemented in their buildings.
So at the middle level, you know, as far as the behavioral part goes, we've implemented PBIS, and we're moving along with that. As far as the academic goes, we're also focusing on that part. There's at East, there was a small group that was looking at UDL, Universal Design for Learning, and also across the board with some professional development led by our C&I team, working on using data for MTSS. So those are 2 areas where we absolutely are focused on at the middle level.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would check both of those. I mean, we have those. We don't have positive behavioral intervention and support at the high school, but we have it in the other 6 buildings, and each of those 6 buildings has implemented the MTSS framework as well, that provides oversight and the consideration of the whole child.
Okay. So we're checking off both of these.
I would say so, yes.
Okay.
If everybody's in agreement with that.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Do you want to move down? So under education, I mean, all these sound good to me. I don't know if there's anything you want to add under other.
I didn't think of anything to add because again, I thought it was a nice list. I checked all of them. I'm not sure if anybody thinks of something else that we could add in there.
Do we have mindfulness?
I would say that.
Well, you know what? I'm not a trauma-informed expert. I'm a believer in mindfulness, but I'm not sure. Are we addressing mindfulness in our health and wellness education plans?
So I would say that the topics listed here under education are absolutely included in the K-5 health and wellness course for sure. And many of them are probably in our current 6 to 12 health classes, but those, if you recall, we did put on hold completing the revisions on those as we waited for the outcome of what would happen in the K-5 elementary specialists. So they'll be reviewed hopefully this coming year. And we do hope to incorporate more mindfulness. That Those were written quite a while ago, so they probably do not have that term in it right now.
Okay. Okay. I mean, it's included, but not limited to, so that's fine. If no one has anything else under staff wellness and support, do we have an employee assistance program? I assume that we do.
I don't think we do, and I don't know if
we
Mr.
don't?
Alabak's on.
We do not.
This is something that I would like us to talk more about, and I know that Mr. Alabak and I have talked about it in different settings. This is something our employees have requested over the years here and there, but we believe it could be a real benefit. We don't have one right now, so.
We
Oh.
actually obtained information right before the pandemic hit. And then other things took precedent, obviously.
Well, I almost feel like we need it now more than ever with all the issues that, you know, everybody's dealing with.
Is there an employee assistance program connected with the health insurance or the consortium at all? No?
No. In fact, each district has their own program. There's not a combined effort from the consortium. It's a good question, but they don't do it.
So yeah, I mean, I know some of the recommendations that I've read around reopening specifically call out having an EAP for faculty. So personally, I have no idea how much it costs.
It is a per person cost, probably around $2.50 to $3 a month per person.
Okay. So it's not a la carte. It's just we pay per member per month.
Correct. And then anyone can use it when they need to.
So it's a couple $1,000s a month.
Yep.
Okay.
I really think it's going to be real important to have, because if anything, the next school year is going to be even more disruptive than the one we've just experienced. And I know that a lot of people are feeling some real stresses and real concerns in regards to the year coming up and moving ahead and trying to remain flexible and balanced life and work and all different kinds of things. So, I mean, I think that if there was ever any time when we would be wise to approve an employee assistance program, now would be the time.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, I would like to see that we have that in place for the start of the new year. I mean, I don't know how everyone else on the board would feel about it, but just knowing
Would any of our
how
grant
different
monies,
cult everything is. I'm sorry, what's that, Kim?
sorry, would any of our grant monies cover that, or?
So I was thinking the same thing, Mrs. Mares. Mrs. Smith, can you speak to that? I mean, I wonder too if FEMA and Pima would cover that, Mr. Weaver.
I was going to say that I think that the ESSER grant, that's the one I've been most involved with. You know, we've talked about behavioral supports and that for students. I'd have to look, but I believe we could probably look at that and figure out a way to incorporate it into there. My only concern would be building it into any grant. It's going to be an ongoing expense that I would imagine you'd want to continue beyond 1 year of the grants, which we could build into the budget down the road. But so short answer, yes, it could probably fit into ESSER. Mr. Weaver, you can speak to the others.
As far as FEMA Pima, that might be a little bit of a stretch for the FEMA and Pima, because remember, there are emergency funds specifically set up for emergency situations. So that might not qualify. We can always stretch it and give it a whirl if we need to.
It would be about a $20,000 cost for the year to do it.
So can I, Mr. Allenbach, I mean, how do people typically come to you in your role when they are having serious life events? Are you able to connect them with appropriate resources? You know, what role would an employee assistance program bill that we're not currently able to address?
Well, if it's implemented and publicized, and people understand that it's a neutral party that administration really doesn't find out about, it may get a lot of usage. Right now, as you say, people would have to come through my office, and depending on what their issue is, they may not feel comfortable sharing that. So either they have to seek something on their own or not get any service. So, you know, I think it is certainly a plan that we need in the district.
If I could add, my experience at 3 other districts that had the employee assistance program, it was very helpful as a building administrator because you're often the front lines of a staff member who's experiencing a crisis or some issue, to be able to offer that to them and help them understand that it is free, and we don't find out if they took advantage of it. And I think most of them, they got a certain number of free sessions, and then from there they would recommend if they needed more or if they didn't. The other piece that I say would be very helpful and is sometimes when you're in a supervisory situation, you can require EAP as part of a performance improvement plan, that they attend certain sessions. I've had EAP members come in and do conflict resolution between team members that could not get along, and it was a third-party person. So I know that's not the primary reason we'd be looking at it, but there are other advantages to it.
Judy, this is Ryan. I just want to jump in to answer, I think, a part of your question. In my experience in the district, that a faculty member in need or a staff member in need usually flows through the building principal's office, often via the counselor. But there is no, it's a, hey, I know this guy, you know, and our insurance does cover a lot of the copay, or excuse me, not the copay. It covers a lot of it for them. But in my experience, folks in need have come through that channel. So to offer that, I know you'd ask that as part of the question. So.
Well, I know as an employee, I used the employee assistance program through at Aetna, and I think that a source of comfort using the EAP is the fact that there is no, it is confidential. Your employer doesn't get approached, nobody else gets approached. I mean, you can really feel free to discuss whatever issues you have, whether they're work related or personal, and it will not get back to an administrator or a boss or a CEO or anything like that. It does not go on any kind of record, and it does assist in allowing you to feel more free to address the issue or even approach addressing an issue, because you know that it's not going to go through the insurance, nobody's going to see it, and it is completely confidential. So and yes, Mrs. Smith, you get like 3 or 4 sessions, which was, you know, in my situation, that was all I really needed. It was just at the time that my mother passed away, and I felt like I needed to talk to somebody about that. So but it was very easily resolved, but there was always the option to go and get additional mental health services through the insurance. I don't know quite what mental health insurance's coverage we have at this point, but that was an option after the 3 or 4 sessions. But it was nice to be able to go and talk to somebody about it just for the 3 or 4 sessions and not have to worry about it getting back to anybody and not having to pay for it.
So it's something we could try to secure grant money and use it for this year, and just as a way of, as a district, saying, you know, we value our staff, we value, we're here to support you with our goal, hopefully being able to carry it on. But I would say even 1 year, particularly this current time, would be better than nothing. So the hope would be that we could carry it through, but at least to do it for now would be
Kim, I
my,
think you cut out there for a minute. Could you repeat that last
yeah.
part?
I was just gonna say, I would think something is better than nothing, and that if we could at least use grant money for this 1 year with the goal of carrying it through, hopefully, but at least offer this to support the staff in this difficult time would be something I would be in favor of.
Anyone else want to offer some insights on this? Anyone, other comments? And if not, then, I'd suggest that we move forward with that. But I guess that still begs the question of, do we check off the box in the policy and commit that this is something that we're going to be providing moving forward? Or do we want to explore this? Personally, I'd say check the box. I think it's something that can provide great value, and the cost is not huge considering what we're getting and considering how incredibly difficult it can be to find competent mental health services in a time of crisis. I think it's something that's really of great value.
This is Lofton. I'd chime in here and just say I think it's a great idea. I think over many years there have been staff that struggled with issues that didn't want to go to their supervisor to talk about that. I think it could create a great benefit for a lot of staff. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
I also wanted to add, I totally agree, and I think it's something that has come up usually through the back door, coming to our attention, maybe as principals, where we want to be able to help, or where I think staff, I think anybody would appreciate the opportunity to have help that doesn't directly go through administration, and I think it definitely fits a very big need at the moment.
Goodness knows we've asked a lot of our teachers in the last 8 months. But this is, I think, the least that we could do, really.
Okay, so I'm hearing no objections, so we're going to move forward with that as well.
So we'll do some research into what may be possible with what we have available this year, and
Okay.
report back.
Everything else there looks really very straightforward. Well, do we provide space for separation and self-regulation? I don't know. I would think that if you're teaching a class, it's very hard to step aside and separate from the class. Actually, I don't know if that's feasible, just given the nature of the job.
So I wonder, Mr. Cleland, I don't know how you feel about some of the spaces that may be available in the buildings. I'm thinking of the faculty room where staff may eat lunch is sometimes a way to separate. I don't know what the implication is here, and I don't know if you have any other ideas that you want to offer.
Many
I
of the
was hoping
buildings,
you, oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to add that many of the buildings have planning centers that could possibly be perhaps set aside as a self-regulation space for staff.
And I was just going to say, reading over that statement, I was hoping you were going to give more information about what that really meant.
Yeah, I'm thinking that there are places in the building where they're designated for staff only. So that's a spot where I would view, at least for separation, maybe not self-regulation. That may be something we work towards, but we do have some designated spots where they're really just for staff. Now, that's something we could focus on and think more about. as Kim said, in this environment in particular.
I'm not real clear what we mean by self-regulation.
I'm guessing it's like a calm down, an opportunity.
That's kind of what it sounds like to me. I just wanted to see if other people had the same understanding.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
When I read that statement, I picture the relaxation lounges at Google headquarters.
We don't have that much grant money, Mr.
I'm gonna
Cleland.
say, Chuck, that's not part of the EAP program.
Everybody gets a stress ball.
Nice try.
No, but I think too, and building off of what I'm hearing, I think to formalize what has been, where someone may get bad news during the day, someone may have something unexpected happen that gets to them while they're teaching, and having seen teachers need to get away from that classroom for a moment. At the middle level, my experience, and Chaz, you chime in, the team supports that. So they'll help and say, get away, and you can get yourself together. Formalizing that and having a designated space that would be known, I think in light of the times we're in, would be very helpful. And if I'm following things correctly here, and I know at the middle level, the team helps out. At the high school, what I see is the hallways are kind of their own groups and support for each other informally in much less serious times. So I think there could be areas, and if staff knew, and if we had a protocol for how you, can break away from your class without getting yourself in trouble, and how you would communicate that. I think that could all be very helpful to staff, from my humble opinion.
Okay.
The only thing I'd add to the whole conversation is we have talked about ways to upgrade or provide different opportunities in the faculty room. They're very kind of some faculty rooms in different buildings. At the high school, it's got a nice paint job, looks really good. And I think we have programs that are internal, like we have at the middle level at East, we have the Stress Less for Adults, where they're given a space and an opportunity to do mindfulness and other exercises, which has been really popular among the staff. And I think kind of building that into more a part of the school culture would be a great addition.
So I'm hearing that we feel that we're confident that we can check this box and meet this goal.
Principal,
Yes.
what do you think?
Dr. Russell, I'll chime in. It's Dave DeAndrea. I'm fully support this. I think it's a great idea, and I think all the principals deal with this on some level very frequently, and I think it would be a good extension to staff to offer this.
Okay. So be cognizant of those faculty room spaces and some of what's implied here. Okay, yeah, I think that sounds good, Mrs. Lofton. We can check that.
Okay. All right. Oh, I think the next one looks like it's pretty straightforward. Data collection and plan review. Do we have a timeline that we want to review this on?
So I said annually for this because this is at the forefront. My recommendation would be annually, so that yearly we review what's happening in our district, the professional development people are participating in, the programming we're offering, unless somebody feels differently.
Can you check 2 there? Because I think that there may need to be adjustments at some time. So if you could check annually, yes, at minimum, we're going to do it, and then as needed.
I'm certainly fine with that. If the committee
Well, maybe we make it at least annually.
do that too. Okay with that, Mrs. Roberts?
Okay. And then what about this last section here?
So I had checked all of them except the employee assistance program, which sounds like now we can check.
Okay.
And I have a question about number 1 and didn't know if Kim Boyd or Laurie could speak to that, or principals, the evidence-based screening tools administered. So would we gather data from a source like that?
I know at the elementary level, and Leslie, I think she's on the call. Leslie's, I'm not sure if you started administering the screening tool yet, but I know 2 of the schools are there, South and Evergreen, as part of that. But I don't know if that's enough to check that box.
Yes, we haven't started that either. We haven't started that as well because we are moving into tier 2. So we will be moving forward. We were hoping this year, but I'm not sure if that will happen as well.
I'm
sorry, go ahead, Dr. Klausner.
The only thing I was going to add, thank you, Dave, is that such data may include, I mean, if we're working towards that and we're using it in some schools, it may be something we want to check, because I think we're working towards it in all of our schools with PBIS. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the schools that are implementing it, it will take time to get there. South implementing it and Evergreen, we didn't get there until year 4 or year 5 of implementation of PBS. You have to have your tier 2 foundation in place. It just takes time to get there.
Okay.
Dave and Leslie, could I ask a question? Is that screening tool though for trauma informed, or is it really just around behaviors more broad?
It looks at internalizing and externalizing behaviors, so it could point towards some sort of specific trauma. So it just gives us more information about kids that we might be missing, and some of their issues might be tied to trauma.
Okay, but it's not solely a trauma-informed screener.
No, I wouldn't call it a trauma-informed screener, but again, it can be used to assess kids that might be dealing with trauma.
Okay. So other than that, we're good with this one. And any other thoughts before we move on? Okay, good. Thank you everyone for the discussion on that. Let's go back to the agenda and see which policy is next. Oh, this is the school security personnel, where we are reviewing our school security personnel policy. So if you could pull up 805.2. So we did just review this in December.
Actually, yeah.
Any questions, comments, concerns? Does I think one of the things when we talked about this before was really who our security personnel are. So if you look under your definitions, and we had school police officers, school resource officers, and school security guards, and we determined that we will have school security guards, and we do not have school police or school resource officers. And I'm comfortable with that. I remember that being, really one of the larger discussions related to this policy. I don't know if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns. I don't know, Barbara, if there are any sections of this policy that you'd like to highlight for us to review again.
I really don't. I feel like we spent a lot of time on this when we were looking at it earlier in the school year. So nothing really that we have to repeat at this point.
Does anyone else want, have anything they want to highlight related to this policy?
I have a question, and I don't think I was involved in December because I wasn't on the board yet. We're just coming on, or maybe I was there, but
Yeah.
brand new. Can you scroll down please a little bit, Dr. Russell? I'm having a hard time pulling it up on my other device, but thank you. So right above guidelines, do any of our school security carry weapons?
They do not.
Of any kind.
So I just didn't know.
They do not.
Okay, to me, that seems like maybe it's a big conversation, and maybe you guys have already had this conversation. It makes, I don't know what I think about that. I'm not sure I'm in favor.
I'm sorry, what are you not in favor of?
Well, I was just wondering why it's in there. School security personnel shall carry weapons only if authorized by the board. So I guess we have not, they haven't been authorized to carry weapons. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't remember, I don't think we've ever really had a serious discussion about having a school resource officer, or if we had a school resource officer, arming them. We did have some discussion a few months back at the tech school for the Joint Operating Committee to around having our school resource officer carry a weapon in the course of duty, and we did vote to allow him to carry a weapon. There was a lot of discussion around it. It was not long after the Florida school shootings, but it was not necessarily prompted by that. They had had an armed officer for a long time before that, based on what was felt to be the needs of the school. That officer left, and then another one came on who had been there for a while. We were familiar with him. Was just we needed to specifically grant him permission to carry a weapon, and after much discussion in the JOC, we decided to let him to allow it. But for our school board, I don't think we've ever really felt the need to have an armed officer.
I think I would recall having that conversation, and I don't think we ever did. I think that it just gave enough people pause to say, nah.
Yeah, I think we explored it in our security conversations. I know it came up as a topic of conversation a couple of times in the Safety and Operations Committee. But yeah, it's not something that we've ever really, it's not a path we've really gone far down.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies it. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to move on to the next policy then? The last one is educational equity, 832.
So I'll just call out Mrs.
Oh, wait. Oh, gosh. All right. I'm sorry. It's so small on my screen. 824. Gosh.
I could do this. How's that?
That is actually a whole lot better.
Yeah. Okay. And these are guidelines. These are the ones that I referenced that have been included, and I think will offer us some helpful language as we consider an addendum to the handbook or additions to the handbook in a different learning environment. It's a bit specific to adult-student boundaries, but there's some other information here that I think will be helpful. So I'll reference it with principals and Mrs. Smith as she was working with Mr. Stanson-Marsh on some of the PV virtual policy protocols.
I'm going down here under social interactions, number 3. Giving personal gift cards or letters to a student without written approval from the building principal. So every year around holidays and end of year do teacher gifts and almost always receive a nice little thank you note in return. So I'm not quite sure if there's a way to exclude appropriate communications and such as that. I sort of understand what they mean here. I think it's written in a way that might be a little bit too broad.
Help me, where are you?
Under social wait, oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the policy.
Oh, okay.
Wait. Where are you?
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
I have it pulled up on my other screen.
Yeah, so what PSBA did was provide some guidelines. And they're calling out some considerations for a digital learning environment in the PNN. So they've provided this summary, and they're calling out some of the salient points to consider.
Okay.
But you're right, here's the point about exchanging notes, emails, or other communications of a personal nature with a student. Goes into some explanation.
I'm reading this, and it's kind of contradictory because exchanging notes, emails, or other communications of a personal nature with a student, and yet they're advising teachers that it would be okay for them to reach out to a kid who may be socially, emotionally struggling, and that's personal. So I don't quite know what the delineate, especially if they're struggling with a home dynamic or something like that. I mean, what is personal?
Well, and I think the other part of this is, at one point, we had a teacher who lived a couple of houses down from us. You can have all kinds of contact with somebody because they're your neighbor or they're a family member, or again, I know where they're going with this. I wonder.
I will say the policy later on specifically mentions teachers who might already have a friendship, like their friends become friends with other people.
Exceptions.
But,
exceptions are okay.
I will say I do have a lot of questions about. I get where they're going with this policy, but there's several numbers in the social interactions section that I would want more clarity on, and I can think of a lot of exceptions that of things that are already done that would go against this policy. I did notice also that Upper Perk, in implementing this policy, they chose to strike that section on social interactions. The one, I forget who mentioned it, but notes to kids, and oh, Ms. Lofton, I think it was you. Thank you notes to kids would need to be approved by the principal now. I know at the elementary level, they still do Valentines. So those Valentines would need to be approved by the principal. So again, I get what they're trying to protect against in the policy, but the language probably needs to be revised or changed, so it's not too restrictive.
So. So Mrs. Lofton, we do not have policy 824.
I'm sorry, what's policy 24?
824, we do not have policy 824.
Yeah, because this is new, right? I mean, I get where they're going, but I feel like
it would just be way too easy for a teacher to get in trouble.
Yeah.
If they decided, or if they felt that a student could benefit from having somebody to talk to on a confidential basis on personal matters, and then we would pull up this policy and say you did a no-no when it was absolutely innocent. You know, I don't like that.
I think the wording may need some work. I think the critical piece for any teacher or employee is to, and it was highlighted there for a moment, to access the resources available. And I agree that line of demarcation is gray. And if you're having those discussions with students and students are confiding in you as a professional, it becomes pretty clear that you may or may not need to tap into the services and resources provided in the building, such as SAP, maybe directly just with the counselor. At the high school, more the county-based supports that are there, the in the moment needs that happen. It's that jumping point, I agree, is not clear. That jumping off point is not clearly defined. To me, it ranges in the realm of questioning, and not that I've ever really had this issue, fortunately, as an administrator that I can recall to deal with, but it ranges into a lingering conversation where maybe the individual steps outside of their area of expertise to try to help the student, and that's where it gets concerning. So I just offer that context, but I understand the line is hard to determine. So I offer that.
And Mrs. Lofton also brought up the situation where a teacher may be a neighbor or someone in the community. I know that when I was in middle school to high school, my music teacher lived 2 doors down from us, and I used to go in the summers and help him in the garden and do stuff like that. It was a kind of a family thing, you know, because our families were friends. So where does something like that fall in too?
Right. And, you know, the other part of that is, you know, there's teachers in the district. Actually, I believe that the schools hand out, if you contact the counseling department, hand out lists of teachers who will do private tutoring. So, I mean, I've hired private tutors to come to my house. I've had teachers provide music lessons in my house. You know, we have all these different ways that we interact. And I think, you know, when you look down here about inappropriate and suspicious conduct, absolutely, yeah, if something's inappropriate or suspicious, it should be reported. I feel like a lot of the things that are under the social interactions here are kind of casting too wide a net.
I,
So, I mean, some of them obviously are.
I mean, some of them are really, I mean, disclosing personal, sexual, family, employment concerns or other private matters to one or more students. That's, you know, I think we all know that crosses the line, but at the same time, then you have giving personal gifts, cards, or letters to a student without written approval from the building principal. Well, you know, does that mean if I take brownies to my neighbor, I have to clear it with the principal to do it? I don't know. I mean, some of it, and you can't go into specifics. You can't say, except in this case, or except in this case, or except in this case. But at the same time, putting it out there kind of makes it difficult to know where the boundaries are when you do have a social relationship with a teacher because they live in your neighborhood or because they're friends of your parents or something like that, you know? So it's difficult.
We also have staff who are parents within the district, which means there are students at their homes because of friendships with their children.
Right.
And again, there is information listed in the exceptions paragraphs that cover at least two of those situations. But like I said before, I guess Boyertown and O&J just put this policy in. They have this policy as is, but Upper Perk got rid of the social interaction section of it just because there's so many questions about a number of them. One that stands out to me is number 16. It says, you can see it there, for adults who are not guidance counseling staff, psychologists, or social workers. Basically, if a student comes to you, you're supposed to say, no, let's get you down to counseling. I just think of several teachers at the high school that are approached by students because they feel safe with them for help with their lives. And there are some teachers that are very good at that. And I know they're not counselors, but to shut that down would be bad.
Well, I don't necessarily read that as you don't have the conversation. I just think at the outcome of that conversation, you're bringing the counselor in or you're referring to resource. I don't read it that way, but I hesitate to split words with an English teacher. So, but I see it as if they confide in you, if a student initiates such discussions, the student should be referred to. It doesn't say the conversation doesn't happen, but you know.
And it does say that you would be encouraging students to a counselor. I know that as a student, I would feel like it was a terrible betrayal to work up the nerve to go to a teacher to talk about something personal. And he says, well, let's trot you down to the guidance counselor. Let's spread this information around. I wouldn't participate in that. As a student, I would feel betrayed.
I mean, most teachers up front these days will say to a student,
right,
you know, yeah, you can tell me stuff, but if you tell me certain stuff, it's going to need to go somewhere else.
Harm to self or others is often the disclaimer. Right. And if you would like to continue, and I would say this, and Chaz, correct me, I think in my experience, this is what happens. Like the conversation happens maybe with the teacher and the counselor's brought on board with the student being coaxed into that. And then you really have, especially at the high school, I see support with the teacher and the counselor and the student. You get that triad together. So the teacher's not necessarily perceived as spreading business. It is above board and saying, look, you're presenting to me with some pretty serious concerns. I think we should go talk to your counselor together, or would you want me to take you down? And they negotiate that. If that needs to be more spelled out, we could certainly do that.
Yeah, that definitely would be a better approach, I would think.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add is at the middle level, we certainly always encourage students to talk to an adult they trust. We talk about teachers in that list, along with school counselors and psychologists, administrators. But we always talk to all of our staff that if a student brings an important, serious issue to you, you should absolutely reach out to the professionals in the building, which be our counselors, school psychologists, to help, or SAP team members to help, provide support for that situation. So that's kind of like I think almost like a team approach. And quite frankly, I think it's in the teacher's best interest to make sure that it's something that serious that they're including personnel, trained personnel in the building to provide the professional help that a student might need. And I think it's done very well. I think the examples you have, a lot of teachers, I think it's coordinated very well to make sure it's not a sense of betrayal. It's always presented as, hey, let's talk about this more with this other person who's really good at having these types of conversations. Because I want to make sure that you're okay. It doesn't exclude the teacher. It actually kind of builds more of a team effort.
So just bigger picture, I mean, do you think there's value in codifying this in policy, or I don't know that actually spelling out the policy that this is exactly how the interaction is going to go.
I think anything that may be interpreted that teachers can have conversations with students is just not healthy for the school, because we always talk about turn to an adult you trust. We also talk about turn to your parents, to turn to somebody you trust, and talk to them about an issue. We would want to make sure that they feel comfortable that they can have that.
I see two things. I think it's a very detailed administrative reg, and I go right to in the times we're living in, training back to teachers. As the conversation went on, I keep thinking about communicating this to teachers, many of whom it would be a refresher for or an update for, in my estimation. But to me, I don't know that it has to get codified to that level, the if-thens in policy, but the administrative reg leading to training, leading to a healthy discussion with every faculty about it.
I don't have a problem codifying the sexual and romantic stuff at all.
Right.
But as far as student-teacher communications or talking about personal things, I agree with Mr. Clune. I think that it's important for a kid to feel like they can talk to their teacher, especially if they have somebody, if they don't have anybody at home that they feel like they can talk to. It's good for them to bring an adult into a situation that they may feel too overwhelmed to handle, and they may trust that their teacher might be the only trusted person they have. So I think that that's important, to be able to leave that open and then allow a teacher to work with counseling as a team that way, if he feels or she feels that the situation is too big for her to handle as a teacher.
So I guess I know we've discussed a lot of concerns around this social interaction section. I mean, do we want to just move forward without the social interactions section? Well, and then even, okay. Or do we want administration to take a step back and look at this again?
I think we're fine to do that. I actually, I was focused on the guide, which focused on the digital. I wasn't looking at the policy itself. And I don't know what policy guide means versus policy. Laurie, do you know the difference?
I think they were just providing additional information, especially in the virtual environment, that would support this policy, but because we didn't have this policy, we brought it forward then to take a look.
Okay. I mean, there's also some overlap to policy 317.1.
I'm sorry, Barb, you cut out there for a little bit. Can you just tell me again what your recommendation is moving forward here?
I mean, I think we need some more time to look at this. There's overlap with policy 317.1, educator misconduct. So I'd really like to take some time to compare. I was honestly looking at the digital aspects, the digital learning environment pieces, and not the romantic or sexual relationships piece. So it would be helpful if we took a little bit more time.
Okay, yeah, let's do that, because I'm hearing a lot of questions about this, and I think it's worthwhile giving it more thought.
Yeah, I'll work with principals on that.
Dr. Russell?
Yes.
As you look at the electronic communications section of the policy,
Yes.
and you discuss it with administrators, I have two quick items. One's from paragraph 5. It regards coaches checking up on students academically and individual communications to that student. It just says that should be copied to a principal and the athletic director. And so just in your discussions, we might want to add in responsibility for training coaches and club supervisors on that approach, if that ends up being the language.
Yeah.
Okay. And then just paragraph 6 about the last, I guess it's the last paragraph.
Okay.
About I guess friends on social networking sites and creating social networking sites for communication with students other than what the district provides. Just something to consider. We probably have teachers out there that have formed Facebook groups for different activities, and they are already friends with students. I mean, they were probably approved, but just maybe if we get some information on how many might be out there before we would make that a policy that you can't do it.
Right. No, I think that's a good point. I did notice that too, and was wondering the same thing. How do we track those things? So we'll look at it, and then maybe we'll talk again before it comes back to the committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for pointing them out. 4 exceptions.
Okay. Are we ready to move on now to educational equity?
We are, yes. Okay. So, let's see, that's 832. Okay, so this, reading through this PSBA policy, this sample, it frames out almost a plan, and it resonates in a lot of ways. So I'll run through, if it's okay, and share with you some of my thinking. There's a lot of checkbox opportunities here. And again, under educational equity audit, I would suggest that happens annually. I don't know how others feel on the committee.
I think that's
Well, I think it's
great.
great. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the same thing. I think it sounds great.
Okay.
So, Barb, before we dive in, just the one question that comes to mind is, you and me and Mrs. Evans-Brockett had attended a PSBA conference in the fall around equity, and at the time, the recommendation that came out of that was just to really take great care in instituting an equity policy, that it's important to be building equity from the ground up as opposed from the top down, and really to have it be culture. And so I believe that that's been part of our goal and the work that the district's doing with Arthur Mitchell. I'm just curious if, as you've been reviewing this policy, what, if that's come to mind, if this is all items that I'm all for advancing initiatives that support equity. I'm just very mindful about the need to make sure that we're promoting it and implementing it in ways that are effective. So I'm curious if you've thought back to that conference and how that relates to actually moving forward with the policy.
You know, I didn't think back to that conference, but I appreciate the point. And some of that emerges in the book club book stamped right now too. Really what I appreciated was the phrases right here: fostering a school climate that is equity focused, culturally responsive. We talked about that last night. Mm-hmm. Employees receive support in the form of training around cultural competency and cultural proficiency, implicit bias. So we're working on those things. So they resonated in that way. I agree. It needs to be, it's benefited by being more of a grassroots and an organic growth. I also feel like we're at a point now where we don't know what we don't know, and we're pushing on some things and really trying to nudge. And this felt reasonable in its approach.
Okay.
So we can go through it real quick. I mean,
yeah, no, I mean, I'm all for it. I just have that little, in the back of my mind of some of the recommendations that we received at that meeting were that the equity policy should organically emerge from the district. So I just want to make sure that we are implementing things in ways that will be embraced by the community as we move forward with them.
Okay. And I certainly appreciate that. I feel like we talked a little bit about an equity action plan last night with some of the steps that we would like to take next year. I would want to review that annually.
Okay.
And I checked all three of these because these are considerations we're making right now.
So I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Wait, you checked all three of the education action plan.
Yeah, right. So practices throughout the district's educational system, goals and practices in the district's comprehensive planning strategies. We do that. And then performance observations.
Okay.
So again, they make sense and they resonate with a lot of the things that we're talking about and trying to work to improve and strengthen. So an educational equity update, I think it would be appropriate for the superintendent to provide that annually. That is a major focus right now. And I checked students, data on students. So when the equity goals or activities are set up by the district, the updates might include some data on our students. And we talk about that. We talk about at least achievement gaps and achievement indicators and the enrollments in our school and the diverse staff that we have representative of some of the students in our schools.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, and we want to monitor these things also. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, you said you checked students. I mean, did we check all of these?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yes, we did. And I think there's a lot of these things that we have at the forefront of our thinking right now that we're doing or we want to do better.
Okay.
So, again, I checked under guidelines, multiple pathways to success / high expectations. all kids. We're talking about inclusion and including more students, adding more rigor to the experiences, access to equitable resources. We think about some of our economically disadvantaged students and, you know, providing them devices during a pandemic when schools shut down. So a lot of these things are happening now. We will continue to work on them. We want an inclusive environment. That's our mission statement. So I checked all of these down through cultural proficiency, and I continued through the list. So Arthur and I talked about an equity lens. Can that be a way that individuals in our community start to view assignments, activities, interactions? So there's a lot in here, I think, that resonates with some of the conversations we've already had.
I'm sorry, is there a definition of an equity lens? I feel, oh, there is. Okay, an intentional focus on, got it, okay.
I don't know, do others have thoughts on this?
So I'm just under cultural proficiency. The district's curriculum shall reflect the distinctive contributions of a diverse society. So I know there's been a lot of talk in the media lately about what is or isn't taught in history textbooks, for example. Is that part of our plan that we will be taking? I know not too many years ago, we did the social studies review and updated that. I mean, are we going to be completely reviewing our social studies programming? How do we actually plan to ensure that the district's curriculum is going to do these things that we're saying?
If I could chime in, a couple of the plans that we have that we'll talk about in the education update is we are working to, just like we identify ELA standards or math or social studies standards, we would like to be able to have cultural proficiency standards or social justice standards. Some we've found that are developed. We'd like Arthur to help us maybe identify some that we can then, as we create curriculum, we can align it to those standards as well and make sure that it is, you know, targeting those regardless of the subject matter that it is. We're also looking at how do we incorporate that into the resources that we're using and being much more thoughtful about what we call windows and mirrors where kids see a reflection of themselves in the curriculum, as well as, you know, a window into the diversity and ethnicity of others. So I think you'll see curriculum documents that come to you, you know, this time next year that will look very different, that will have these pieces incorporated. We are in the midst of a 7 to 9 social studies review. So the timing is perfect. And they actually got delayed because of the closure. So that actually has given us the time to really be purposeful with embedding some of these things purposefully in 7 to 9. And then the plan is to move into 10 to 12, as well as look at what other, you know, courses should we be offering that we hope to bring to you at program planning time to provide some additional opportunities, particularly in the social studies area, but obviously we want to spread beyond that as well.
I think it's important. I know that the focus on history and teaching proper history and social studies and that sort of thing is important, but I also hope that there is an additional focus on things like the literature they're encouraged to read, the art that they're encouraged to look at and participate in and understand. Music can also be have a huge impact as far as cultural diversity is concerned. So I hope that we don't just focus on social studies and that we actually seek to include this in as many courses as we can possibly put our hands on.
I completely agree, Mrs. Roberts, and that is exactly where we're going. We just happen to have been in the midst of social studies, so we'll kind of bite that off first, but absolutely, we're hoping to incorporate it into all courses.
Okay. In essence, what I'm hearing is that we are intending to move forward with this policy as it is presented, with essentially all of the checkboxes checked off.
That would be my recommendation. I really appreciated the language in it.
Okay.
This is a really good policy. I like this one.
Any thoughts, comments, concerns? I'm wondering, Chaz, do you have any? Are you comfortable with the language as it's presented?
Yes, I think it's great.
Okay.
I think we should approach all of our curriculum revision through an equity lens. The first thing I thought in reading some of the language was whether or not what we're doing here, we do this through an equity lens. I think we do to some degree, but just seeing in front of us can make us more aware and really improve what we do here in policy.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, I'm curious if, that's something that winds up getting added to rubrics, that, how do we have it be something that is actually happening as opposed to, we look at a policy. I mean, we're pretty open-ended in how we approach our policy discussions. So, I'd like to hope that we all bring that view of working to promote equity in our discussions. Yeah, it'll just be interesting. I look forward to seeing these discussions move forward and be implemented. Okay. Anyone have anything else? Okay. Well, then I guess we will move on. We don't have any local policies. And that brings us to closing items. Let's see, 5.01, comments from the audience are accepted on any topic. Mrs. Widener, were any comments emailed to the virtual board meeting?
No, I did not receive any comments.
Okay, great. So 5.02, meeting schedule for 2021. Our next scheduled meeting is Tuesday, September 22nd. And it may be held at the district office. It may be on Zoom, and we will just have to see how that moves forward. And if no one has anything else, then I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. And thank you all for your time. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.